Beijing declared 5 more years of zero COVID, but backtracks on their claim. They say an error and a mistake on the part of the reporter. So do we expect China to go with hard lockdown and mass testing for 5 more years? I'll break that down. Plus, I speak with Arthur Herman, an expert on data, machine learning, and quantum computing about the threat of China using big data, surveillance, and AI to wage a data war against the US. That's as the FCC head Brendan Carr asked for the app to be removed, what he calls sheep's clothing of the app's ability to spy on Americans. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Now, inside China's current struggle for power, the totalitarian leader Xi Jinping fights hard to get himself a third term in power. And that means 5 more years of Xi Jinping's backward policy to return China to the Mao Zedong era. That is, total state control. And his opponents seek something different, still heavily relying on the communist murderous path, but less so compared to Xi Jinping. In this battle, the fall of 2022 will be a key moment as power is confirmed as the 20th National Congress starts. But even before that, there has been a series of power struggle events that have surfaced in recent days. And this one that I heard this week seems to be the most shocking yet. The officials in Beijing claim they will have 5 more years of zero COVID in China. Yeah, you heard that right. China will continue to embrace its zero COVID policy, which consists of hardcore lockdown and testing, QR code-based health passport, total surveillance, and white garb PPE soldiers for the 5 years ahead. That means while the rest of the world moved on from COVID, China will continue to embrace whatever comes next, but zero COVID. Now, we've said this before. The zero COVID model is basically one that represents the Communist Party leader's authority. And if it is deemed to be a failure, that means the leader has failed, and we know that this can't happen under CCP rules. What happened was Cai Qi, the hardcore crony of Xi Jinping and the secretary of the Beijing Municipal Party Committee, gave a report this week where he basically triggered a public outcry by saying, quote, "In the next 5 years, Beijing will persistently grasp the normalized pandemic prevention and control and unswervingly adhere to the general strategy of, quote, external prevention, internal prevention, and rebound, and the general policy of dynamic zero. In other words, the same zero COVID policy will continue." Now, soon, the 4 words, "the next 5 years," became a hot topic on Weibo, which is China's version of Twitter. Now, due to the strong public reaction to what he said, the officials had to clarify. The Beijing Daily subsequently deleted the 4 shocking words, which are the next 5 years, from their reporting, and Weibo, the Chinese Twitter, has cleared up the hashtag the next 5 years from appearing on the search, as well as the publisher even came out to clarify that it was the reporter who added the next 5 years, but not really the editorial control of the entire paper. And that reporter had made a template, apparently, in advance in order to grab the time-sensitive reporting, which is on Cai Qi's speech. And that they accidentally put the persistent pandemic method of zero COVID focus on the next 5-year copy template, and that got published. So that was the story they claim, which means they blame it on an editorial error that somehow got past the editors, got past the publishers, and somehow got past all of the censorship online. Now, some people even went as far as to go into the full video of Cai Qi's speech broadcasted by Beijing TV and actually found that he started to talk about Beijing's pandemic control and its policies, but actually never mentioned the 4 words, next 5 years. So that got interesting. Basically, Cai Qi himself, in his speech that he was reading, didn't say next 5 years. So why did a reporter add that in? Did he really just misuse a template and cause a national storm? Well, probably not quite. First of all, there's no way for us to tell if Cai Qi actually had the next 5 years in his script or not. We don't have the draft for his original reading. But on the other hand, even if he didn't mention the words the next 5 years, it doesn't mean that the speech itself didn't include it. The reason is this. We did some digging, and it seems the oral version of what Cai Qi read out loud versus what is actually printed on the script could be very different. because there were versions of the script circulating online as some of the pro-CCP members were trying to say that, look, this speech didn't have those words in it. But it seems to me that according to the video, as well as what was said in the script version that was published online, there are discrepancies between when a certain phrases were said to the timing of the next phrase. And in between, there were discrepancies. So it seems to me Cai Qi's original report is likely to have the key phrase, the next 5 years, in it, but because both the party media as well as the TV station, they would usually get the full report in advance, they would actually write up the actual report, the so-called time-sensitive report, ahead of time so that they can be published right after. Which means it is likely because they had the original draft, Cai Qi himself skipped or omitted saying those words in his speech, but this reporter actually published it based on the original script that he was given in advance for publicity's sakes. Now, while he was reading the script, Cai Qi that is, perhaps out of the instinctive political sensitivity, he didn't read out the 4 words, the next 5 years, but then the reporter, of course, wouldn't have known that he wasn't going to read it and just kind of published it. But then the bigger issue here is, why are these words so sensitive? Well, you and I probably have pandemic flashbacks on the horror that was the lockdown. For the CCP, the reason is simple. Because these 4 words contain very rich and even important information about the state of internal fighting between powers. Now, the signal that Beijing will adhere to the general policy of constant pandemic control and zero COVID in the next 5 years is actually coinciding with the length of power. That is, if Xi Jinping is chosen for his 3rd term as the secretary of the CCP and Cai Qi himself chosen as the party secretary of Beijing, then that actually is the term duration for how long they're going to stay in power. Now, that seems kind of interesting when we consider the fact that nobody knows how the virus will evolve from this point on. No expert can predict what will happen to this CCP virus that came from Wuhan, China, just as no one actually predicted or imagined that a less severe variant called Omicron would emerge following Delta. And if this is the case, then what basis does Cai Qi have to know that certainly the future pandemic is so serious that it needs to be fought against for at least 5 more years? There's only one answer for that, and that is zero COVID. The policy itself has nothing to do with the public health crisis or the change in the virus or the mutation itself. It's only a predetermined policy based on the political needs of the authorities. In other words, Cai Qi has admitted that the so-called zero COVID policy has nothing to do with the pandemic, and that it is a measure introduced by the authorities, Xi Jinping himself, for political needs. Now, whether the authorities are doing it out of the face-saving or strengthening social control or whatever, it's just a political necessity anyways, however we look at the situation. Now, as we just said, the 20th National Congress is approaching in the fall, and that's when they'll decide if Xi Jinping can get his 3rd term in power, which is a 5-year term. And in order to do so, you have to set up the public opinion in the country so that everyone sort of agrees with what Xi Jinping is doing, what is politically correct for the leader's decision. And that is, of course, zero COVID. We know that Shanghai was under lockdown for April to May, and essentially it was a situation of human disaster. But to the authorities, they're now claiming victory over the virus. The method that was used in Shanghai was once again zero COVID. It was a lockdown, it was quarantine, it was mass testing, and it was these soldiers dressed in white PPE patrolling the streets. And Shanghai proves the great success of Xi Jinping in the end, because they're now parading the success of zero COVID. And that tells openly to the country, whoever opposes Xi Jinping means they undermine public health, they undermine the leader's authorities, and they also undermine the people's wishes, which again set up the path to success for Xi Jinping. The people agrees with what Xi Jinping is doing. And so in the end, this sort of rolls out the red carpet for Xi Jinping's re-election, as he now claims it is his personal deployment of the policies against that virus. If not for him, China's historical turnaround from the rich country to the strong country will not be completed, and from the country that fought and won from the pandemic will not have completed without Xi Jinping's directions, and that is zero COVID. Now the question is, why 5 more years if already you've declared victory on COVID once in Shanghai and multiple other cities? Well, we know and they know too, because no one has control over what the virus can do, not in Shanghai, not in other like Beijing or in Wuhan. And of course, zero COVID didn't work. They just declared it a victory because, well, it suits the political needs, and that outweighs what the natural disaster and the chaos it was for the pandemic.